Look around the world. We see incredible wealth, stunning technological advancement, but we also see grinding poverty and societies struggling to survive. Why are some nations so rich while others lag behind? It's a question with a complex answer, woven from history, culture, politics, and geography. Geography isn't just about maps and mountains. It's about the resources available, the climate endured, and the ease of connection or isolation enforced.
Let's start with natural resources. Think of oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia or Venezuela. Their vast reserves have fueled rapid economic growth, transforming them into global players. But the story of natural resources is not always one of unmitigated blessing. Countries overly reliant on a single commodity often experience boom and bust cycles, their economies vulnerable to price fluctuations.
Climate plays a pivotal role in shaping economic destinies. Consider the temperate zones, home to some of the world's most prosperous nations. Their moderate climates are conducive to agriculture, allowing for diverse crops and high yields. Contrast this with tropical regions often plagued by extreme heat, humidity, and endemic diseases like malaria. These factors can significantly hamper agricultural productivity, making it a constant struggle to feed growing populations. Landlocked countries often face significant challenges in accessing global markets, making their exports less competitive.
Imagine a world before airplanes and container ships, where oceans were barriers, not bridges. Societies isolated by mountains or deserts, developed in isolation, their technologies and cultures shaped by their unique environments. This historical isolation had profound consequences. When Europeans, armed with advanced technologies, arrived in the Americas, they found societies ill-equipped to resist, leading to brutal conquest and reshaping of continents.
The year 1492 marks a pivotal point in human history. Christopher Columbus's voyage brought the Americas into the European sphere of influence. This encounter set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the world, leading to the rise of global empires and the transatlantic slave trade. The Europeans brought advanced weaponry and diseases like smallpox, decimating indigenous populations. This demographic collapse created a vacuum filled with enslaved Africans, fueling the Industrial Revolution and enriching Europe.
The age of exploration was less about exploration and more about exploitation. European powers carved up the world, establishing colonies as sources of raw materials and captive markets. Colonies were often forbidden from developing their own industries, keeping them economically dependent. This system stifled innovation and created economies dependent on their colonial masters. The legacies of colonialism are still felt today, with many former colonies struggling with underdeveloped infrastructure and limited access to education and healthcare.
The impact of colonialism went far beyond economics. It reshaped borders, often with little regard for existing ethnic or cultural divisions, sowing the seeds of future conflicts. Colonial powers imposed their own languages, cultures, and systems of governance, disrupting existing social structures. The story of colonialism helps explain the stark disparities we see in the world today. Understanding the geography of economic development requires recognizing the enduring legacies of colonialism.
Let's talk about latitude. History shows a pattern. Nations further from the equator, enjoying temperate climates, often fared better economically. Temperate zones have a Goldilocks climate, perfect for agriculture. This surplus in agriculture allowed for specialization of labor and economic growth. These regions had fewer diseases, leading to a healthier, more productive workforce. While climate isn't destiny, overcoming a challenging climate often requires extraordinary effort and innovation.
Imagine trying to build a nation in the Himalayas or the Sahara Desert. Mountains isolate communities, making trade difficult and expensive. Deserts present challenges with scarce water and scorching temperatures, making agriculture a gamble. Nations blessed with favorable terrain had a head start in connecting, trading, and expanding. Geography's hand can be harsh, making the journey towards prosperity steeper and more arduous.
Water plays a paradoxical role in economic development. Regions with reliable rainfall have a distinct advantage, supporting larger populations and economic diversification. Rivers act as arteries of commerce, connecting communities and facilitating trade. Erratic rainfall, droughts, or floods can be economically devastating, trapping nations in a cycle of poverty. The uneven distribution of water resources has played a significant role in shaping global wealth disparities.
The silent thief of human potential disease. Tropical regions have been plagued by a higher burden of infectious diseases, weakening workforces and straining healthcare systems. This disease burden has had a profound impact on economic development. Many of the world's poorest nations are located in tropical regions, grappling with these challenges. Addressing this disease burden is not just a matter of healthcare, it's an economic imperative.
Let's turn back the clock, long before airplanes and supertankers. Imagine a world where the only highways were made of water. Rivers were the lifelines of ancient civilizations. They provided water for drinking, irrigation, and transportation. Think of the Nile, the lifeblood of ancient Egypt. Its annual floods allowed for a thriving agricultural society. The Nile also acted as a highway, transporting goods and people. Similarly, the Tigris, Euphrates, Indus, and Yellow rivers cradled flourishing civilizations. Navigable rivers made transportation cheaper and more efficient. Boats connected inland communities with coastal cities. This ease of movement facilitated the exchange of goods and ideas. Rivers also provided fish, a vital protein source. They played a crucial role in defense, acting as natural barriers. Rivers shaped everything from economics to culture and warfare.
Empires of the seas. Civilizations grew, pushing beyond river valleys to the oceans. Seafaring became sophisticated with advancements in shipbuilding and navigation. Greeks established trading colonies in the Mediterranean. Romans built an empire united by their control of the Mediterranean. Their merchant fleets transported goods, fueling the Roman economy. Seafaring empires like the Portuguese and Spanish marked a new era in global trade. Maritime powers established colonies, their galleons laden with goods. Oceans became highways of commerce, carrying the seeds of globalization. Maritime dominance impacted global wealth distribution. European powers amassed wealth, fueling their industrial revolutions. Oceans became battlegrounds for dominance, carrying the weight of empire.
While some nations thrived on the opportunities presented by their proximity to water, others found themselves disadvantaged by their landlocked locations. Without coastlines and easy access to waterways, these nations faced significant hurdles in participating in global trade, their economic development often stunted by the tyranny of distance. Imagine trying to transport goods over land, across vast distances, without the benefit of modern roads or railways. It was a costly and time-consuming endeavor, fraught with risks from bandits, weather, and treacherous terrain. This made exports less competitive, limiting access to markets and hindering economic growth. Landlocked nations often found themselves at the mercy of their coastal neighbors, dependent on their goodwill for access to ports and trade routes. This isolation often translated to limited exposure to new ideas, technologies, and cultural exchanges that flowed more freely along trade routes. While coastal societies benefited from the cross-pollination of knowledge and innovation, landlocked communities often remained more insular, their development hampered by limited access to the outside world. This is not to say that all landlocked nations were destined to lag behind. Some, like Switzerland, overcame their geographical disadvantages through strategic alliances, specialized industries, and a focus on human capital. However, their success often came at a higher cost, requiring greater ingenuity and effort to overcome the inherent challenges posed by their landlocked status.
Fast forward to the present day. Access to waterways remains crucial in economic development. The oceans are the arteries of global trade, carrying over 90% of the world's goods. Nations with well-developed ports have a distinct advantage. Singapore exemplifies the importance of maritime connectivity. However, reliance on maritime trade brings vulnerabilities. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the fragility of these systems. Understanding economic geography requires recognizing the significance of waterways. While technology has shrunk our world, the oceans remain a defining feature.
The world we inherit with its stark economic disparities isn't an accident. It's a tapestry woven over centuries, threads of conquest, colonialism, and exploitation intertwined with geography. Imagine the Americas before Columbus, a mosaic of diverse cultures, some with empires rivaling those of the Old World, their wealth, gold, silver, land, resources unimaginable to their European conquerors. But conquest, fueled by gunpowder and greed, shattered these civilizations. Europeans, armed with superior weaponry and driven by a thirst for riches, seized land, enslaved populations, and plundered resources. Gold and silver, once the pride of the Inca and Aztec empires, flowed across the Atlantic, enriching European monarchs and fueling their own economic expansion. This wasn't just theft, it was a systematic dismantling of existing economic structures. Indigenous industries, from weaving to agriculture, were suppressed, replaced with systems designed to extract wealth for the colonizers. This deliberate underdevelopment had lasting consequences, creating economies reliant on exporting raw materials, a pattern that persists in many former colonies today. The echoes of conquest reverberate through time: generational poverty, lack of access to education and healthcare, political instability. These are often the legacies of a past where geography became a curse, a tool for exploitation rather than a springboard for prosperity. Understanding these historical injustices is essential to understanding the present economic landscape.
Section 2. The persistence of inequality. The end of colonialism didn't erase the lines drawn on maps, nor did it magically level the playing field. Many nations, freed from direct political control, found themselves economically shackled, their destinies still shaped by decisions made centuries ago. Their resources, often extracted at a pittance during colonial rule, continued to fuel the prosperity of former colonizers. Think of cocoa, the bean that gives us chocolate. Côte d'Ivoire, a West African nation, produces nearly half the world's supply. Yet most cocoa farmers there live in poverty, earning a pittance while multinational corporations reap the profits. This unequal power dynamic, a legacy of colonial trade structures, traps nations in a cycle of dependence, unable to leverage their own resources for their own development. This isn't just about raw materials. Intellectual property rights, often skewed in favor of developed nations, limit the ability of developing nations to develop their own industries and technologies. Debt burdens, often accrued at exorbitant interest rates, further cripple economies, forcing governments to prioritize debt repayment over investing in their own people. The persistence of inequality, rooted in historical injustices and perpetuated by unfair trade practices, is a stark reminder that geography's influence extends far beyond mountains and rivers. It's about power dynamics, access to opportunities, and the often invisible structures that continue to benefit some at the expense of others. Section 3. Uneven playing field. Globalization, often touted as a rising tide lifting all boats, has in reality exacerbated existing inequalities. While it has created opportunities for some, particularly in nations with the infrastructure and education levels to compete in a globalized marketplace, it has also left many behind. Imagine a foot race where some runners are given a head start, while others are forced to wear weighted shoes. That's the reality of the global economy for many developing nations. They enter the race at a disadvantage, burdened by historical injustices, limited access to capital and technology, and often hampered by corruption and weak governance. Climate change, driven primarily by the emissions of industrialized nations, adds another layer of complexity. Rising sea levels threaten island nations and coastal communities in developing countries, while droughts and extreme weather events disrupt agricultural production, pushing already vulnerable populations further into poverty. The uneven playing field of the global economy demands our attention. addressing historical injustices, promoting fair trade practices, investing in education and infrastructure in developing nations, and mitigating the impacts of climate change. These are not just acts of charity, but investments in a more just and equitable future for all. Section 1. The Enduring Influence. Our journey through the geography of economic development reveals a complex interplay of factors shaping nations. Natural resources have fueled booms and busts. Temperate climates often provided a head start in prosperity. Access to waterways has shaped empires and wealth. Geography is a stage, not a script. Human choices, from conquerors to innovators, shape our world. Colonialism's legacy of exploitation casts a long shadow. Globalization has exacerbated inequalities. It creates winners and losers on a global scale. Climate change disproportionately impacts the least responsible. Understanding economic geography is about recognizing historical forces and power dynamics. Disparities are not inevitable. They result from human choices. Systems can be reformed and choices can be unmade. Charting a different course. The challenges are real, but so are the opportunities. We have the knowledge, technology, and resources to create a just world. Fair trade, not just free trade, is essential, ensuring developing nations have a fair shot at competing globally. Addressing climate change is an economic imperative. By working together, we can create a more equitable future. Subscribe to our channel for more videos on economic development and global wealth distribution.